It was crushed by a coalition of lords supporting King Ramapala, a member of the ruling dynasty. Unlike other agrarian uprisings, the Kaivarta rebellion was recorded by a court poet because it could be used to eulogize Ramapala. This poet's name was Sandhyakaranandin, and he described himself as the Valmiki of the Kali age, Kalikala Valmiki. The title was not coincidental. His sole surviving work, the Ramacharitam, is both an epic tale of Ramapala and, in parts, a deliberate parallel between the king and the god Rama. This is achieved through complex, often puzzling Sanskrit double entendres. These were studied by historian Kumkum Roy in her chapter The Artful Biographer, Sandhyakaranandin's Ramacharitam. Here's Sandhyakaranandin at work in an example provided by Professor Roy. Unlike Rama, Ramapala was not his father's eldest son, and far from the fraternal amity of the Ramayana, Ramapala had actually been imprisoned by his elder brother before seizing the throne himself. But the poet equates the two by using the Sanskrit term Jyeshtha, meaning both eldest in the case of Rama and best in the case of Ramapala. In another obvious parallel, Ramapala's feudatories are compared to Hanuman and other Vanara monkey men. Other comparisons are not so obvious. Ramapala's capital city is praised as the equal of Lanka. The Pala home territory Varendri is compared to Sita. And the Ramacharitam, rather than compare Ramapala's rival Bhima Kaivarta to Ravana, actually praises him for his generosity and virtue. So, what are we to make of all this? Professor Roy suggests that Sandhyakaranandin was rather carefully hedging his bets using Rama with the god's felicitous similarity to Ramapala's name. The Kaivarta rebellion was over, but the Pala kingdom was still unstable in the 12th century, on the verge of collapse. Hence the comparison of the land of Varendri rather than a specific queen to Sita, because the ruler of the land might change, in which case the poet could simply reuse the verses in another composition. Clearly, then, Sandhyakaranandin's approach to the Rama legend was not one of devotee to supreme god. The Rama legend instead offered a canvas, a palette of ideas, and using them with skill, the poet could find patronage and success in an unstable political environment. Sandhyakaranandin was indicative of a broader change in medieval India. From the 10th to the 12th century CE, kings and court poets perfected the craft of appropriating myths for their own circumstances. Such appropriations are often thought of as resulting purely from devotion or from cynical politics, but the reality is somewhere in between. Medieval kings and poets like Sandhyakaranandin certainly understood the political value of rewriting myth. At the same time, what we call myth was to them a semi-real history of real ages, which they saw as themselves reenacting in the Kali age. For example, the 11th century Eastern Chalukya king Rajaraja Narendra was caught in the brutal interdynastic strife of the Chola Chalukya wars, many of whose protagonists claimed descent from the sun and the moon. His personal circumstances certainly inspired his need for a political and literary text. So, when commissioning a Telugu retelling of the Mahabharata, he is recorded to have said, "My lineage begins with the moon and then proceeds through Puru, Bharata, Kuru and King Pandu. The stories of Pandu's famous sons, the Pandavas, virtuous and beyond blame, are ever close to my heart. My mind inclines day and night to these stories." Translation by Velcheru Narayan Rao and David Shulman in an anthology of classical Telugu poetry. Rajaraja's brother-in-law, the Chola Emperor Veerarajendra, was also aware of the political utility of myth. By the time he came to the throne in 1063, the empire was caught in ever-escalating warfare with its neighbors, and a public argument had to be made to justify the emperor's wars. As philologist Whitney Cox writes in Politics, Kingship and Poetry in Medieval South India, Sanskrit eulogies published by Veerarajendra's court did so by mining the Rama legend. In one case, they claimed that a king called Chola had been born into the solar dynasty of Rama. While on a hunt, he chased a demon in the form of a deer, followed by his army, and finally reached the Kaveri river, where he gave land grants to Brahmins. Veerarajendra, like this putative ancestor, had also made major land grants to Brahmins. The Rama legend was also used to argue that rulers like Veerarajendra had to do difficult things. Here's a quote from one of Veerarajendra's inscriptions, composed in the 11th century by the poet Chandrabhushana Bhatta and translated by Whitney Cox. "Rama didn't kill the lord of the Rakshasas out of anger, nor out of desire did he bring back his beloved. He fulfilled the duties of a king completely and fully. If you think that he did not, why did he strike down the Shudra who was practicing tapas on Mount Malaya with a sword? For the relevant inscription, see Epigraphia Indica 25, page 25. Of course, what a medieval court thought were the duties of a king vary quite drastically from ours. The point is that just like Sandhyakaranandin, the Chola poet found that the Rama legend could be used to support the political situation of his patrons. There's much more to say about Rama and the peoples who have sought to tell his story. In the next edition of Thinking Medieval, we will cross the Bay of Bengal to see some of them. I'm sure there's a bit of a controversial opinion, so if you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear them. Follow us everywhere on social media. You can find me on Instagram at Anirudh and at Connected Histories, and on Twitter at Kanisetti. We'll see you next week.